Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's very nice to see you all here, and welcome also to those following us on stream. My name is Selma Brattberg, and I'm the president of SAI, and we're one of the hosts of this event together with Prio. We're going to have a panel discussion in not too much time, but I wanted to first take some time to present this year's Free to Think report. So first a few words about SAI and our work with academic freedom and with scholars at risk. So SAI was established by Norwegian students and academics back in 1961. And since then we have been working for access to higher education and for the protection of academic freedom. And in solidarity with students and academics around the world. It's on? Yeah. Perfect. And in the work for protection of academic freedom, we have a close collaboration with Scholars at Risk, both on the international level, but also on a local level here, or national level here in Norway. The past few years, we have, for example, sit together in a UN expert working group that has developed the principles for implementing the right to academic freedom. So, and then we also collaborate with Scholars at Risk Norway of launching this Free to Think report here in Norway every year. So the Free to Think report looks more into concrete examples and specific violations on the higher education sector. But it's important to remember when we look at those examples that these examples are not isolated issues. They are part of a bigger trend. Here you can see numbers from the updated version of the Academic Freedom Index from VIDEM. And the most recent data here, it shows that more than half of the world's population currently lives in contexts with completely restricted or severely restricted levels of academic freedom. It also shows that the Academic Freedom Index is expanding in just 10 out of 179 assessed countries. So, and it's also important to note that this includes both authoritarian contexts, but also democratic contexts. So this is kind of the background where this year's Free to Think report is launched in. So, looking at this year's Free to Think report, the Free to Think report has been given out since 2015, so this is the 10th edition of the report. Scholars at Risk have reported a total of 391 attacks, and it's important to note that this number is not an exhaustive number. These are kind of attacks that Scholars at Risk have been able to verify, and also they have limited resources, so they're not able to kind of report on and verify all attacks that happen. But this number shows some trends. So even if it's not an exhaustive number, it still shows kind of the trends of attacks on the higher education sector. And these numbers have been kind of reported from 313 incidents, because some incidents are categorized under several different forms of attacks, and also from 51 different countries and territories. And some key takeaways from this year's report is that attacks on higher education are frequent. They are diverse. There's a lot of a big number of different kinds of attacks, and also that they are consequential for everyone, everywhere. These attacks happen all over the world in authoritarian countries, in conflict areas, but also in democratic countries. And in this year's report, Scholars at Risk has also reported a higher number of attacks in democratic countries, particularly in the US and Europe. And this includes both introduction of new legislation and policies that restrict academic freedom, but also that we see a high number of incidents involving police response to campus demonstrations. Here you can see the different types of attacks that Scholars at Risk report. The first one, killings, violence, and disappearances, which is maybe the most severe form of attack, and which also has a very big chilling effect, because this, of course, harms individuals, but it also harms the whole university settings, because this is also frightening to students and academics and faculty that watch these attacks. And we also have imprisonment and prosecution, and that is also quite widely used. Also loss of position. Sometimes loss of position could be explained with research content or teaching content, but also sometimes we see that that they're also kind of using budget restrictions as kind of the excuse, or they might not give an excuse at all. And then we also see travel restrictions being used. We know that for kind of a good and for a good academic environment, you also need to be able to travel, to visit research conferences, and to collaborate. Could also include students going to do field work, etc. And we see that students and academics doing these kind of trips are sometimes also being restricted from that. And then we have an other category, which typically include military raids on and occupation of higher education facilities. It could be damage or destruction of higher education facilities that we often see during armed conflicts and war. And then it could also be legislative and administrative actions that erode institutional autonomy. So this could be kind of a number of different attacks that doesn't fit under the other ones. I wanted to just give a few examples of specific events that are mentioned in the report to show kind of the variety of different attacks. In Afghanistan on January 9th, 2024, Taliban forces detained Javed Kakar, the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at Roshan Afghanistan Online University. Taliban forces interrogated Kakar about the funding for this university and the university's affiliations, and then releasing him 2 weeks later. But Kakar resigned from his role at the university after this incident. Another example is from the United States, where dozens of scholars and university staff members lost their jobs because their teaching, scholarship, or job focused on disfavored topics. One example is in May 2024, where DePaul University terminated the contract of an adjunct professor in microbiology after students complained about an optional assignment that this professor gave analyzing the biological and health impacts of Israeli military actions on Gaza. The university fired the professor effective immediately. There's also an example from Catholic University, also in the US, where a psychology professor lost her job after a doula she invited to class spoke about providing abortion and about caring for transgender patients. And then a last example that I wanted to show is from Zimbabwe on February 17th, 2024, where a group of researchers affiliated with the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, they were conducting a study on governance in the country. And they were deported and being accused of sneaking into the country in order to inform Washington's adversarial foreign policy towards Zimbabwe. I also wanted to mention attacks on student expression, because as we've seen for several years now, almost 50%. This year it's 47% of the reported incidents are attacks on student expression. So we see that there's a high number of attacks on student expression. And I mention this both because the number is so high, but also because it's important to remember that students are also kind of protected under academic freedom. This has been contested in some incidents, but it's very clear in the principles that I mentioned that both Scholars at Risk and SCI has been part of developing the principles for implementing the right to higher education. They very clearly state that students do have the right to academic freedom. I also wanted to just mention this report briefly, Activism Under Attack 2024, which is a report by SCI, which looks more into repression of student activism. So this is also something you could look up if you're interested in that aspect. Just very briefly, before we conclude, what are the impact of these attacks? Of course, they do have implications on individuals, taking away freedoms, the rights to study, sometimes also taking away people's lives. But we also see that the impacts go beyond that. We see that the self-censorship is high. And we also see, as I mentioned, that this impact also has a chilling effect on the wider higher education community. And ultimately, this is also harming all of us and chilling free thought and expression, which also is a threat to our democracies. That was very, very briefly kind of the global context. And then in this event, we wanted to look more into two examples from Palestine and Myanmar, which is maybe also one of the two kind of clearest and biggest examples in the Free to Think report 2024. So to start off the conversation, I would like to invite up on stage Asma Abusamra. She's an assistant professor and also the head of continuing education center at the University College of Applied Sciences. And she is now here in Norway through the Scholars at Risk program, working at the University of Oslo. So welcome up, Asma. Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me up here. You brought a couple of videos that we thought we would start by showing. But I think the pictures are the most important.
Yeah.
Anyways.
But yeah. I can just simply talk about what we are watching now. This is simply our life before the 7th of October. It's not easy to describe it as being was, because I had been working in this institution. It's called the University College of Applied Science. I have joined this institution since 2004. I remember me and my colleagues, we grow up together, and the university grew up with us, building every day the futures and the hopes of thousands and thousands and thousands of the students. And when the war started, there were 90,000 students studying in 13 different higher education institutions in Gaza. And all these 13 higher education institutions, including my university, were destroyed. And the person who was showing up mostly in the video, he is the president of our university. And unfortunately, he was killed with all his family members at the beginning of the war. And in the same time, we lost also 45 members of the academic staff. And we are talking about the academic staff. I'm not talking about staff and academic. I'm talking about them as being, a family. We all in Gaza, we are, family-oriented culture. So we all know each other. So for us, it's not just a picture or a person was in the video. It's a life we built between the walls, on the desks and the chairs. And if you saw the Arabic writings in the video, we were highlighting some expressions for the students. Draw your dream. Because being occupied for long and long years, and especially after 2006, Gaza has been under severe, harsh, strict blockade, okay? And in the same time, nothing that easy. And despite all the challenge that we have witnessed day after day, we kept drawing the dreams for the students just to keep going and to proceed their own lives. I remember that we taught them how to think beyond borders and to break the barriers of occupation with education. Because for us, education is liberty, liberty of minds and souls. With the press of a button and with some knowledge in your head, you can just cross the border and communicate with lots of cultures, and you build your own institutions and collaborate with different international bodies. And despite all of this, we had been building like the most improved academic institutions. I can think that we can show some of the labs, because when I'm talking about education in Gaza, some of the people, they were surprised. What did you have actually in Gaza before the war? It hasn't been rubble all the time. We have big infrastructure. And the pictures show something very good and positive. And I'm very sad that they are no longer exist. But behind every tool, behind every laptop, I remember we took years of negotiations and taking permissions from different authorities and international bodies just to have like a small, educational tool like VR gadgets, for example, laptops, medical equipments, because we had nursing department at our university. And we made it. We were patient enough because our life in Gaza taught us to be resilient and to be flexible. And whenever we fall down, we stand up again and try to resume our hope. I'm very sad that all the buildings of UCAS were destroyed. We are applied university because, as you know, the harsh conditions of the Gaza, we have a very high percentage of unemployment. Our university has a good prestigious reputation in applied and technical education. And with the testimony of lots of our partners from international countries, including Europe, when they visited UCAS, they were really surprised about the infrastructure, about the buildings. UCAS has also the first business incubator inside Gaza, and it's the first of its type, not only in Gaza, but in Palestine as well as in the Middle East. And we built this business incubator just, to bring hope for the students who they have like, tremendous projects, thoughts, and they have tremendous ideas, surprising efforts to be patient in the middle of all this chaos. I don't know if they are, still alive. Most of the people who are showing now, they are a family. And I know that this is the second semester of UCAS, and it's still working without infrastructure. And when I mean infrastructure, I mean the buildings. The last building you saw here was the workshop. It's like an excellence center because we are providing this specialization. And it was the last building destroyed in the war. And you can show the video of destruction. The whole campus was destroyed, and the last building, I believe, was destroyed in the last August. And actually, there is a video just to see that, and it's not easy as it is. Salma, education is a right. It's a right, it's not a luxury. And in the same time, in Gaza, we keep to stick to this right. And that's why it is very difficult just not to go on, even despite the harsh conditions that we are living in Gaza during these periods.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Asma, and also reminding us of the education sector and what was there. And I think it's important to also remember that with the pictures we've been seeing the last year. And you touched upon it a little bit now, but as you're saying, even though the university buildings are destroyed, university life still goes on. Like, people are researching, people are studying. We also have some pictures here. Do you want to tell us a bit about this picture, and also how is kind of university life going on?
As I told you, that education is a right, and the entire of our life that we privilege this life, and in the same time we help the students to proceed. Not for us, for them. Because for me, this picture is more than a picture of students applying for their final exams. They are sitting in a hospital, and if you can see that some of the girls, or one or two girls, are sitting on one of the beds from the hospital. It's not, they don't have desks or tables or proper conditions to apply for exams as normal people. Again, education is a right, it's not a privilege. And for those students, I believe behind each student there is a story, because I have been there. There are no roads in Gaza. There are destructions, and if you want just simply to go to a near place, sometimes you have just to walk for 2 or 3 hours. So I believe that most of these students, they went to this place walking different hours, not thinking about the bombing and the killing surrounding them, and they came for a target, just to proceed home. So all the time, when I keep, talking to lots of people about we need to bridge the hope for the continuation of education in Gaza, I keep talking about these students that in the middle of the chaos, we need to give them reason to think how to live, not how to die. And education is the way. And if the whole money which is used for destruction, which was, for example, built for peace or used for peace, life would be a better place and it would make a difference. And we tried to help these students. This picture was the beginning of the war. Now we created with different initiatives what we called like spaces of hope. They are more systematic, are more organized. During months of the war, we provide them with some laptops, some disks, for example, desks and tables, some solar energy to provide electricity. The students are welcome not only from my university, from all the universities in Gaza. They can come to study using these laptops. Also, they can just take the materials that they want to study and just take it offline and to study it at home, for example, with their mobile gadgets. It's like small initiatives, but the problem is all the initiatives that are conducted now in Gaza, they are like bottom-up initiatives. There is no like an umbrella framework to contribute in preserving the education. And this is the biggest question that, moves in my mind a lot during these days. When you presented the report about the Free to Think, the background was the University of Al-Azhar. This was the very privileged and traditional universities that we have. This is one of the oldest universities. And it's very sad pictures just to see rubbles and ruins. I'm thinking also about if the war stopped tomorrow, how many years are we going just to have in order to have buildings? Building knowledge is not just with 1 day or 2 or 3. In Newcastle, we lost most of our servers. And if you are an academic person, you take years in order just to build a curriculum. And now when we are talking about lots of people who want just to lend us support and hand for the continuation of education, we ask them to think in an innovative way. Because actually, Salma, we have like tremendous challenging problems. And you might not be surprised, but we are thinking deeply about how to solve these problems in the middle of all the harsh context. For example, we have engineering students. They used to go to companies and firms. No companies and firms in Gaza, they are all destroyed as well. Where should they go? So we asked some of the universities to provide like virtual reality field training for these students, for example. We asked some of the universities also to share their online resources and materials. This is part of sharing knowledge. And this is what are the universities for. This is internationalization. And when one of the universities fall down, the whole universities worldwide should stand just to protect the right of this university to stand up again. Selma, I don't want the tents and the spaces of hope, although there are spaces for hope for me, and I wish they expand the whole Gaza. I don't want the tents to be the new normal of Gaza.
Thank you. And we are going to come back to this, but I would also like to invite up our 2 other panelists. Marte Nilsen is a senior researcher here at PRIO with a particular focus on Myanmar and Thailand and on the Rohingya crisis. Welcome up. And then we also have Jørgen Jenshaugen, who is also a senior researcher here at PRIO, mainly focusing his research on the Arab-Israeli and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and also the author of the book En kort introduksjon til Israel-Palestina-konflikten, which came out in a new edition yesterday, right? With a new chapter on Gaza. So So welcome up to the two of you as well. And I wanted to start with you, Marte. We've just heard descriptions here from Asma on the situation in Gaza, and that's also I think most Norwegians have seen pictures in the news the last year, and many of us probably know the situation quite well. But I think a situation that we know less about is what's going on in Myanmar. Could you just start by saying something about the situation in Myanmar, and also how, especially how the higher education sector there is under pressure?
Thank you, Selma. So Gaza and Myanmar are both experiencing very brutal wars, but they are quite different. In Myanmar, it's the military, so it's the acting government in the country that is the problem, and there's a civil war between the population and the military regime. In your report, it says that since the coup in 2001, student population is down by 90%. So the students basically have left higher education. But it's more complex than this. There's two reasons. There's the CDMers and the PDFers. The CDMers, the civil disobedient movement, which is mostly after the coup, public sector employees and students across sectors left their jobs. Even doctors left their jobs in protest. And they opened up hospitals on the side, a student also on the side. But mainly it's a very, very strong and clear message to the military that the coup was unacceptable. It didn't take very long time, maybe half a year, until the brutality of the military forced some of these to go into armed conflict against the regime. So some of those who are civil disobedient movement members took up arms and formed People Defense Forces. And quite a lot of the students you will find, very young people you find in the jungle trying to fight this military government. And to understand this, I think we need to also understand the political history of student movements in Myanmar, because there's a tradition for student activism. It's part of the student identity, I would say, in Myanmar, to put their lives on hold in extreme situations. And either, boycott, as the CDM movement does, or actually going into resistance, violent or peaceful. And the democracy movement in Myanmar has always been led by students. And universities were closed in many years in the late 1980s and 1990s. First time I visited Myanmar, all the university were closed, but all the young people I met identified as students. We are students. But the university had been closed for more than 2 years. So the military regime in Myanmar are afraid of the student union. They are the leaders of democracy movements. Aung San, who is the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, that many here knows, was the founder of both the Myanmar Student Movement Union and the military. So both, they have the same kind of founding father. So they are kind of in the opposite towards each other from history as well. And this is part of the identity of Myanmar student and student unions. So the military regime are really afraid of them. That's why they closed the university. That was why they arrest and terrorize and torture students. And this is why also universities in Myanmar has been very decentralized. In a federalist country as Myanmar proposed to be, you should think this is a positive move, but the decentralization of students and universities is to control the students, is to have them in small and not so academically advanced universities around the city in order to hinder them to form movement against the military. So that's the background of why students are so active in this resistance against the military, and that's also why the numbers are so drastic that actually all students have left universities. There are also some alternatives, as Asma was also saying, like even though normal student life is impossible, there are alternatives. And in Myanmar, it's you have ethnic minority education, and this has been going on for many decades. But there are alternative structures in what they call liberated areas, where ethnic minority armies have their territories. And these, especially like the Karen National Union, has a quite advanced higher education system. In other places where there is not the same kind of control from an alternative governance structure, you would have ethnic minorities that form community school training programs to kind of expand the space for education. So there might be students going to the universities, but in addition, or they go to these locally organized private sector initiatives that provide quality, like critical thinking and quality education, but without the kind of official status that higher education system have. So, and you can also find that in the Bamar-dominated central areas. So the majority population will also have these kind of schools, institute, private initiatives that do teaching from people with a background for international studies, for example, to provide alternatives. And this has been going on for many decades, but it's kind of like really now after the coup getting a new revival. But it's dangerous. So many have left the country. Most students are now in Thailand and getting programs there, or some also get to the US and other international institutions. So there's a way to kind of some people are putting their lives at hold, others find alternatives outside of the country. And one of the reasons why this has been even more the exile population of students have grown exponentially is because the military also have come up with these conscription laws, like new conscription laws, to try to forcefully recruit young people into the military because they're running out of military personnel. So that's also, of course, one part of the reason why students are leaving.
Thank you, Marte. What you described, like this very kind of targeted attacks on the higher education sector and on students, is something that we see in both Myanmar and in the Palestinian context. We do mention the conscription laws, for example, in Myanmar. In Palestine, there is a group of UN experts who has talked about scholasticide, for example, a systematic attack on the education sector. And I wanted to go a bit back to that and the Palestinian context. And also because we know that the attacks on the education sector in Palestine it's not something new. It didn't start after October 7th last year. It has been happening. The higher education sector has always kind of existed under occupation. So I'm I wanted to ask you, Jørgen, but you can also, of course, comment, Asma, like what have been the attacks that we've seen also before October 7th, both on Gaza, but also the West Bank and also Israel. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, so that's a long and complicated story. I just really want to start out just by quoting the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish, who says about kind of the Palestinian condition that we suffer from this incurable malady called hope. And I think that really describes Asma's perspective here. Because in the current situation, I think scholasticide is a very accurate term, because, you know, you brought up kind of the scale of destruction of the universities. But if we go down to like lower level education, it's really extreme. I mean, we're talking about 85% of schools have been directly hit or damaged, and 61% have been directly hit by bombardment, including 70% of UNRWA-run schools, which is basically the UN agency that runs most of the schools in the Gaza Strip. So there is a complete disrespect for also the UN flag. So educational institutions are targeted en masse, but it doesn't matter if they're, state-like schools or UN-run schools, it doesn't matter. And because of the ongoing war, a total of 625,000 students have not had any education formally. Of course, we have the informal or continuation of educational structures despite all of this, but the schools have been closed down. And this is very extreme in Gaza, both because of the situation, but also because the Palestinian society is such a young society. I'm not talking about like the history of the state or the nation or whatever, but it's the population is so young. So targeting schools, targeting education sectors just basically means that you're targeting such a large portion of the population. And this, as you say, it's a history that goes far back. And, you know, I think although the destruction has been most extreme in Gaza, particularly now, there is this historic tension between the occupying power and the educational institutions. And I think the first Intifada really exemplifies that, where one of the things that happened was basically that the occupation forces closed down the universities. And there were sit-in teachings, there were, you know, illegal teaching situations where teachers would get students to just come to their houses or go to, you know, mosques to do teaching there. So basically continuation of education despite it being illegal. And that is really kind of the history of Palestine in a way. I forget which book because he wrote so many, but the great Palestinian thinker Edward Said, he talked about kind of the 48 generation, the first generation that fled, that they had this sense that the world could play with them as kind of marginalized victims that didn't have a role in history because they lacked education. So that first generation of Palestinian refugees, they thought, if we only get education, then we must be taken seriously. Then we must be able to sit at the table with, you know, the great players of history. And that generation just, I mean, they grew up in refugee camps, but the educational level of Palestinians is exceptional. It's really a society, you talk about kind of outliers in like statistical models. In terms of poverty and conflict history and level of education, Palestinian society is really an outlier. That combination is really, really unique. So, you know, we can highlight the first Intifada, we can highlight the current Gaza war, but that's just really been part of kind of Palestinian history, I think.
Did you want to comment as well?
For me, if I want to say about this or want to speak about this, scholasticide has been all the time the issue, even before the 7th of October. I never, you know, I don't remember that one of the academic instructors wants simply just to join a conference in another country, just, you know, to book a ticket and go out there simply as it is. No, he needs just to register for 2 months in advance. And if he's lucky, just to have an acceptance just to leave through the Egyptian borders. And for the best cases, he will not be accepted for 2 months. And maybe lots of conference will be, coming and going without giving even the permission just to leave. This is not only the case for the academic staff, it's also the same issue for the students. Even if we want just simply, and as you said, if you want to cross the borders inside the country itself, for example, if I want to go from Gaza to the West Bank, I have to go through lots of process. I remember we had like a kick-off meeting. This is like a collaboration between Gaza and the West Bank and some of the international bodies. I remember that 30 staff of the academic members in our university, they were all rejected for no apparent reason. And me, myself, I have been rejected like 3 or 4 times. And I was only given the opportunity to go to the West Bank at the age of 42. And it's only 1.5 hours if I want just to drive the car to go to Ramallah or Jerusalem. Are talking about one country. So you can think about lots of students who were denied just to cross the border, just to have their scholarship to proceed their master's and PhD. And yes, Palestine, and we are proud of that. We have the highest percentage of educated people despite the harsh economic condition. And the education is not free in Gaza, as you know. And in the same time, people are willing to invest in education because they know that education is the hope. But this is very, critical issue when you are an academic person and you don't have this academic freedom, because in the entire life we are talking about academic freedom. I know that most of the academic instructors, once they wrote something on a Facebook to criticize what we are having, because we are living in an occupation, but we don't have the privilege of an occupied country. We didn't have, for example, like proper education, proper health, proper energy. You might find this is like a bit strange. Me and a friend of mine, he's still in Gaza with his family. We are writing a chapter about scholasticide. And we received like a comment from the reviewers that because of the schools are shut down, the students are not receiving like a proper meals as they had in the school. But guess what? Schools and the school's children, they did not at all have like proper meals at school. Even the UNRWA schools, they could not provide the children with the proper meals. We had never had meals for the children inside the schools. Despite all these harsh conditions, again, we don't have like the privilege of education that all the people they have. But in the same time, we keep stuck to this hope all the time and to proceed in making this work because this is the only way. And to stress what did you say, we built the universities in Palestine to preserve our identity and culture. And before, it's like an educational institutions. This is a place where the Palestinians celebrate their identity because we had been living in chaos in most of our lives. I remember my father had just to go to Egypt to study. But I got the privilege to study in Palestine and proceed in my higher education. Before Intifada, most of the people, they were, forced just to go to Jordan or to Egypt to study or proceed in their higher education. And we struggled so hard to build our higher educations to preserve our identity as Palestinian.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask all of you, and you've touched upon it now, but why do we see this targeted attack on the education sector and the higher education sector, both in Myanmar and Palestine, but also in many other contexts, like the Free to Think report shows? Maybe we can start with you, Marta.
I think what we all have been saying here is to start with that this has been going on for a long time. It's not like, even though both these countries are now on the I could see they were on the very bottom of the graph that you were showing. But it's been going on for a long time, and we've stated many times already today that education is a right. In an authoritarian setting, education for the repressors is a very strong tool to control, either by taking it away or by controlling what is there. So in Myanmar, you could see that education has been something that has been under control to try to control people. But for people at the same time, and this is the paradox, for people at the same time, the education is a way and a tool of resistance. And it happens within those controlled institutions, and it happens on the side in these alternative spaces. And this is a paradox that is important to kind of realize. But I think the bottom line of your question is that education is a way to control people.
Want to comment, any of you?
Well, I just really want to say that there is kind of a deep paradox here, because if you take Israel's word for it, the problem is that Gaza is filled with fundamentalists who just hate Israel just because Israel exists. The way to, if that were the case, just like a theoretical, if that were the case, the best way to fight that is to give people hope, to give people a long-term perspective, jobs, security in their life, critical thinking. Critical thinking is the best way to fight fundamentalism. So if we take Israel at its word, why would they destroy higher education? Like it's a paradox. It doesn't make sense from kind of a logical military perspective like that. But I agree with Marta. It's fundamentally about that these institutions also represent state building. They represent building of society bottom up, and that society, by virtue of being occupied, does not like the occupier. That's the way things work. But there is a paradox here, and it's not something that you can just easily grapple with, because Gazans need education, and there is no functioning future Gaza without education. So that we as an international society has to fundamentally stand behind that, right? And just say, that the seats of higher education must be preserved.
It's not just a paradox. As I said, that the universities are the identity. So they simply want to destroy the identity because they understand that we created these universities under harsh conditions just, to assert the hope inside the students' mentality. And this is our resistance. So they kill the resistance by killing the universities and the intellectual power inside these universities. And if you track back all the stories from Gaza, there was deliberate attacks on academic professors. So how come like three universities presidents to be killed with their families? Are talking about one of the academic lecturers and a professor at the Islamic University, for example. He's a poet. He just wrote about this. He created hopes. He asked the students to write like stories from Gaza. And I read these stories about hope, celebrate life, and try to live despite all these harsh conditions. For example, he was also killed with all his family. Yeah, if you want to kill the resistance inside the hearts, destroy their education.
We're running out of time, unfortunately, but I have one last question to all of you, and maybe first Martin Jørgen. The Free to Think report seeks to document what we have just talked about, these systematic attacks on the higher education sector. And why do you think, or do you think that's important? Why do you think that's important? And what do you think, what can that contribute to, or like how should we use the Free to Think report?
I think it shows, it highlights something that is often not make it through to the media, because it's a very education is very fundamental to all societies. So it kind of lifts up something that comes in the background of the other atrocities that are happening. So that's very important. I think what the graph you were showing in the beginning is also important, that you see that it's not just an isolated cases. It's also something that is quite dramatic for the time that we're living in, and that's really important to get that message out.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, as academics, protecting academic freedom and rights and liberty, that is, you know, is just fundamental to how we think of the world. So I think the report can be very useful in kind of building networks and raising awareness of that throughout, you know, the academic community, but also the world, I guess. But I think it also really highlights the need to preserve some of the things that we as a society must underscore. I mean, there is no education, and there's no democracy, functioning civil society. There is no resilient society without education. It is a right, but it's a right that kind of feeds into all these structures that we need to preserve, that we need to build and enhance. And we have, you know, all these debates about, you know, how to fight disinformation and rising populism and authoritarianism. You know, education is the key to all of those things. And if we allow it to wither and die, that is part and parcel of allowing authoritarianism to win.
I wanted to ask you, Asma, what do you think Norwegian higher education institutions and us as actors within the higher education sector in Norway can do to support the higher education sector in Gaza and Palestine?
Well, actually, it's a big question that can be answered, you know, in 1 minute or 2 minutes. It needs like workshops and conferences just to lend support and lend us hand to think about the challenges every day. You need to ask us what you actually need now in Gaza. Or at least, as I visited some of the countries, you need to ask about how are the people out there? At least simple questions that can make a difference. And what you are talking about the report, Free to Think, is like a good sign that we need just to keep this in our mind. Education should be protected, not only in Gaza, worldwide. And when I decided once to be an academic person and as a researcher, I wanted to contribute, you know, to the sake of humanity, to make the world better, not to make other people bombed somewhere else. And this is like a good sign for the people to think about what is right and what is wrong, and how we can preserve education. And it's like a butterfly effect. And it's true that if one of the academic, for example, when I'm talking about the academic context, is falling down or is in damage, the whole world will be affected in a way or another. So we should respond immediately. And again, lots of thoughts can be done, lots of supports can be made, but at the beginning, you should ask, what do you actually need at this stage in your life as a Palestinian? And again, if you ask all the people out there, we go for the continuation of education because this is the freedom.
Thank you, Asma, and thank you so much also, Jørgen and Marte, for joining. And if you're interested in reading more, you can find the Free to Think report online on Scholars at Risk's webpage. And if you're interested in reading more about student activism and engagement, you can find the Psy Activism Under Attack report back there in the corner. But please join me again in thanking the panelists so much. Thank you.